She waited 1 month like he promised. He came back 5 years later, and saw her with 3 identical daughters who had his eyes. Jessica had never been the kind of woman who sought out glamorous events, but that evening in Manhattan was an exception. Her friend had begged her to come, a charity gala for underprivileged children, hosted in one of the city's most luxurious hotels. The chandeliers glowed with warm light, music floated gently through the air, and strangers in expensive clothes clinked glasses over shallow conversations. Jessica felt out of place in her simple blue dress, her hair tied loosely, but she smiled politely and tried to enjoy the evening. She had just turned away from the dessert table when she bumped into someone. A glass wobbled in his hand but didn't spill, and he caught her elbow with swift, instinctive grace. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was calm and rich, steadying her more than the touch itself. She looked up. He had deep brown eyes that were unusually intense, framed by dark lashes. His hair was tousled just enough to look effortless, though nothing about him seemed unintentional. He wore no name tag. A tailored black suit hugged his frame, no tie, a bit of scruff on his jaw, polished, but not artificial. "I'm fine," she answered, embarrassed. "I wasn't looking." "I'm glad you weren't," he said with a half-smile. "Or we wouldn't have met." That line should have sounded cheesy, but somehow it didn't. He introduced himself as Alex. Just Alex. And despite the formal setting, he led her away from the crowd, towards a quieter corner near the window where the city lights blinked in the distance. They talked for hours. She learned he'd grown up in California, that he was in the tech industry, that he loved music but couldn't play an instrument. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions that made her feel seen. When she told him she worked with preschoolers, he asked for stories, real stories, about the chaos and wonder of raising tiny humans. He laughed in the right places, not to impress her but because he genuinely seemed amused. She didn't know he was a billionaire. He never said his last name. He didn't drop names or brag or check his phone. He only checked his watch once, to make sure they weren't missing the last dance. When the music slowed and couples moved to the floor, he offered his hand and said, "You came all the way here. Might as well make it worth it." They danced once. Then again. Then walked the streets afterward like the night wasn't ending. He bought her coffee from a 24-hour shop. They sat on a bench, shoulders brushing, talking about nothing and everything. She found herself telling him about her childhood, about how she always wanted a big family but didn't know if she'd ever find the right person. He looked at her like the city didn't exist around them. In the pale light of early morning, when they finally stood in front of her apartment building, he touched her hand gently. "I have to fly out tonight," he said. "Work. But I'll be back in a month." Jessica's heart fluttered and twisted at the same time. "A month?" He nodded. 4 weeks. "I'll come find you. Promise." She believed him. She didn't know why, she barely knew him. But she believed. And so she watched him walk away, not knowing it would be the last time for 5 years. The first week after Alex left, Jessica felt as though she were walking through a dream. Everything around her was cast in a soft glow, every sound a little quieter, every hour stretching slightly longer than usual. The memory of their conversations, his voice, his smile, all of it played on a loop in her mind. She replayed the way he'd touched her hand so gently when he said goodbye, how earnestly he'd promised to return. Her friends teased her for being distracted, her co-workers noticed the distant look in her eyes, but she didn't mind. He said a month. She could wait. When that month passed, she told herself to be patient. Maybe work had kept him longer than he thought. He seemed important, busy. Maybe he had no signal. Maybe he was still planning something. The optimism dulled the anxiety at first, like a warm blanket covering her growing confusion. She checked her phone constantly, reread the few texts they'd exchanged, and stared at his name in her contact list, hovering over it without pressing call. What if she sounded desperate? What if he was just delayed? By the 6th week, her doubt began to whisper louder. She called once. No answer. Then again. Then she tried texting, just short, casual things, little notes that didn't demand anything, only suggested she was thinking of him. Still nothing. His social media presence was non-existent. No new posts. His number didn't go to voicemail, but it rang, hollow and unanswered. And eventually, the ringing stopped too. The realization sank in slowly. Not with a dramatic heartbreak, but a cold, quiet ache. She had been ghosted. She didn't want to use that word. It sounded too shallow for what she felt, too teenage. But what else could explain his disappearance? No explanation. No closure. Just silence, where a promise used to be. Around the 9th week, she woke up dizzy and nauseous. She assumed it was stress or exhaustion. It wasn't. A few days later, she bought a test on a whim, mostly to rule it out and calm her nerves. She took it in the morning and left it on the bathroom counter while she brushed her teeth, not really expecting anything. 2 lines. At first, her brain didn't register what she was seeing. She checked the instructions again, held the test to the light, blinked hard. Then she sat on the floor of her tiny bathroom and stared at the wall for 10 minutes in silence. Pregnant. It wasn't possible. It wasn't real. But it was. And somewhere, deep inside her, a part of her already knew before she took the test. That flutter in her chest wasn't anxiety. It was instinct. She went to the doctor 2 days later. They confirmed it. But the shock wasn't over. The nurse smiled awkwardly, eyes flicking to the monitor. We're seeing 3 heartbeats, she said softly. Jessica blinked. 3? Yes, the nurse said, more cautiously now. Triplets. Jessica didn't cry. Not right away. Not when they showed her the tiny flickering pulses on the screen, or when they handed her a folder full of prenatal advice and warnings. She nodded, robotic, her thoughts moving too fast and too slow at once. 3 lives. Dependent on her. Growing inside her. On the subway ride home, she looked out the window and tried to imagine what Alex would say if he were there. She imagined his voice, "You've got this, Jess. You're stronger than you think." But the seat beside her remained empty. When she told her parents, their reaction was cold, mechanical, more concerned with shame than support. They offered no help. Her father called it irresponsible. Her mother cried for the wrong reasons. Jessica didn't argue. She packed what little she had, quit her job, and left the city. She found a small apartment in a quiet town 4 hours north. Rent was cheap, the streets were calm, and no one asked questions. She sold her jewelry, picked up side work, and eventually found a part-time job at a daycare center. It was ironic, caring for other people's children while her own were still months away from being born. But she needed the income and the distraction. The pregnancy was hard. Every doctor's visit carried a new warning. Her body was tired before the second trimester even began. She bought second-hand clothes, studied parenting blogs late at night, and tried not to feel the fear that crept into her bones every time she thought about what was coming. The silence from Alex was like a ghost that hovered in the background, always watching, never speaking. At times she hated him. At others, she missed him so much it made her stomach twist. She chose the names carefully, softly, whispering them to herself at night. Lily. Maddie. Haley. She spoke to them through her belly, told them stories about stars and flowers and how they were already loved. And as her belly grew, so did her resolve. She didn't need to be rescued. She could do this. 9 months after their last dance, she gave birth to 3 daughters with dark brown hair and the same deep brown eyes that used to look at her like she was the only person in the world. The moment she held them, all 3 at once, wrinkled and screaming and perfect, she cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness. From something bigger. Something real. She didn't know if Alex would ever come back. But she had something even stronger now. She had a reason to move forward. 3 of them. Jessica quickly learned that raising 3 children alone wasn't just exhausting, it was all-consuming. From the moment she opened her eyes each morning to the last second before she collapsed into sleep, every hour belonged to Lily, Maddie, and Haley. Their cries weren't always in sync, but their hunger seemed to be. When one woke up from a nap, the other 2 weren't far behind. Diapers piled up, bottles boiled, laundry overflowed, and quiet was a luxury that no longer existed. Still, she loved them in a way she hadn't known was possible, with a depth so fierce it frightened her sometimes. She found rhythm in chaos, a kind of balance in imbalance. The girls grew quickly, too quickly, and before long they were crawling, then walking, then talking in a whirlwind of giggles and squeals. They had distinct personalities, even though they looked almost identical. Lily was bold and stubborn, the first to climb and the last to give up. Maddie was gentle, often comforting her sisters when they cried, her little hands patting their backs like a miniature mother. Haley was the curious one, always watching, her eyes alert and thoughtful even before she could form full sentences. People often stared at them when Jessica walked through town. 3 little girls with chestnut hair and large brown eyes, identical, almost eerily so. Strangers would ask if they were triplets, then follow up with the inevitable, "Where's their dad?" Jessica learned to smile without answering, or to offer vague responses that deflected without inviting more questions. It wasn't that she was ashamed, it was that she didn't have an answer herself. Sometimes she imagined Alex walking beside her, holding one of the girls in his arms, maybe pushing a stroller, laughing the way he had that night in Manhattan. But those thoughts only lingered for a few seconds before she forced herself to bury them. The town was small and safe, and over time it became home. Jessica made friends with other mothers, found moments of joy in the simplest things. A new word one of the girls said, a quiet afternoon where no one cried, the way all 3 would wrap their arms around her legs and yell "Mama," like she was the center of their world. And in many ways, she was. There was no one else. No one coming. No promises left to break. 5 birthdays came and went. Jessica always made them special, baking 3 tiny cakes instead of 1, hanging balloons in the living room, singing their names in separate songs so no one felt forgotten. The girls didn't seem to mind having only each other and their mother. In fact, they were inseparable. They played in patterns. If one jumped, the others jumped. If one sang, the other 2 harmonized in the strange, instinctual way siblings sometimes do. They shared secrets in glances and held hands even when walking down the hallway at home. Watching them sometimes made Jessica cry, not out of sadness, but awe. They had each other, and they had her. And for a long time, that was enough. Until the day everything shifted. It was a spring afternoon. The town was holding a children's festival in the park, filled with cotton candy stands, puppet shows, and colorful booths with face painting and balloon animals. Jessica had dressed the girls in matching yellow dresses with little white shoes. Their hair was in soft ponytails, and they each carried a sunflower-shaped lollipop from a kind vendor who always gave them free treats. Jessica was speaking to another mom when she noticed Lily had stopped walking. The little girl was standing frozen, staring ahead at someone in the crowd. Jessica followed her gaze and spotted a tall man near the edge of the gathering, hands in his coat pockets, looking lost. He wasn't doing anything unusual. He wasn't waving or smiling. He was just standing there, his eyes locked on the girls. Jessica's stomach turned. Not in fear, in something else. Recognition. Something about the way he stood, the shape of his jaw, the way the sunlight touched his hair. Haley looked up at Jessica and said softly, "That man has my eyes." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The man stepped forward slightly. Their eyes met. 5 years of silence collapsed in an instant. His face changed, disbelief, sorrow, hope, all at once. Jessica took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was him. Alex. He looked older, worn in places she didn't remember. His hair was longer, a bit messier, and his eyes, the same deep brown, held something new, something hollowed out. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just stood there, drinking in the sight of her and the 3 girls who mirrored his face. Jessica didn't say a word. She picked up Maddie, took Lily's hand, gestured for Haley, and turned away. Her mind spun in circles as she walked as quickly as she could toward the car, her chest burning. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. The past had just found its way back to her. Jessica didn't sleep that night. After she put the girls to bed and turned off the hallway light, she sat on the couch in complete silence, staring at nothing, trying to steady her breathing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face again. Alex. Alive. Standing only 20 feet away from her daughters, from her. Looking like a ghost and a memory all at once. Her chest felt tight, as if the air around her was too thick to breathe. She had imagined this moment more times than she could count, what she would say if she ever saw him again, how she would yell or cry or demand answers. But in reality, when it actually happened, all she did was walk away. And he hadn't stopped her. The next morning passed in a haze. She dressed the girls, packed their lunchboxes, and took them to preschool as if everything were normal. But inside, she was unraveling. A part of her wanted to pretend she had imagined the whole thing, that her exhausted mind had conjured him out of memory. But she hadn't. She knew it was real. She'd felt it in her bones the moment their eyes met. By the 3rd day, the anxiety was unbearable. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every knock on the door made her heart pound. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like the life she had so carefully built for her daughters could fall apart at any moment. On the 4th afternoon, while the girls were at a play date, it finally happened. A soft knock, not frantic, not hesitant, just quiet. Steady. She stood frozen for a few seconds, her hand hovering above the doorknob. Then she opened it. Alex stood there. His hair was slightly damp from the drizzle outside, and he held no umbrella. He looked tired, older, like someone who had been through things that didn't leave bruises on the outside but still changed you forever. He didn't say her name. He didn't reach for her. He just whispered, "Hi." Jessica crossed her arms, her voice low and sharp. "What do you want?" He looked down at his shoes for a moment, then back up at her. "To explain. To see them. To see you. I never stopped thinking about you." "You disappeared," she said, her voice shaking. "You promised me a month. And then nothing. No call. No message. You ghosted me like I was nothing." "I didn't," he said quickly, a kind of desperation rising in his voice. "I swear to you, I didn't leave you. I wasn't avoiding you. I tried to come back." She didn't invite him in, but she didn't shut the door either. He took a breath. "I flew to Brazil 3 days after I saw you. It was supposed to be a quick deal, 2 weeks tops. The night I was supposed to fly back, the plane went down over the rainforest. There were survivors, but barely. I was one of them. I spent 4 months in a hospital in a village that didn't even have power half the time. I had no ID, no phone. My passport was gone. Everything was gone." Jessica didn't speak, her hand trembling on the edge of the doorframe. "I was listed as missing," he continued. "For almost a year. No one knew where I was. And when I came back, the company had moved on without me, the board had taken over, my accounts were locked. My life as I knew it was just gone. I had to rebuild everything. Slowly. Quietly. I kept trying to find you, but I didn't even know your last name. I didn't even know what city you lived in." "You're lying," she whispered, but the part of her that had missed him for 5 years wasn't so sure. "I'm not," he said. "I know how it sounds. I know I don't deserve your trust. But I swear to you, I came back. I looked for you. I still am." She shook her head, her breath shaky. "You don't get to show up 5 years later and expect to walk into our lives. You don't get to look at those girls like you didn't miss everything. You weren't there. Not for the sleepless nights. Not for the birthdays. Not when they first said mama. You weren't there, Alex." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "And it kills me." They stood in silence. The drizzle had turned to rain, soft and persistent. She could smell the scent of damp leaves and wet earth drifting through the doorway. He finally asked, almost in a whisper, "Can I meet them? Just once?" Jessica hesitated. Her heart warred with her logic. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't even know if he was telling the truth. But she also didn't know how to look her daughters in the eye and say, "No, you can't meet the man with your eyes." She took a slow breath and said, "Not today. But maybe. If you're still here in a week, and if you're willing to be patient, maybe." He nodded, slowly, with something like hope beginning to return to his expression. He turned to leave but paused. "Thank you for not slamming the door," he said softly. Jessica didn't respond. She closed the door slowly, then leaned her back against it, sinking to the floor as her tears finally came. Not from anger. Not from relief. From everything she had been carrying for 5 long years. The next few days unfolded like a fragile balancing act. Jessica moved through them with cautious deliberation, her mind constantly caught between memory and reality. She tried to stay grounded in the present, making breakfast for the girls, folding their tiny clothes, walking them to preschool, but part of her was always elsewhere, replaying Alex's words, analyzing every expression on his face, every hesitation in his voice. She wanted to dismiss his story, to file it under the category of too convenient and too late, but something in her heart resisted. It was the way he'd looked at them, at her, not with guilt or arrogance, but with sorrow. Like a man haunted. She didn't tell the girls right away. What could she even say? They were still too young to understand abandonment or the ache of broken promises. But they were not blind. They noticed everything. And by the third day, Haley asked, casually but with a curious tilt of her head, "Mama, are you sad?" Jessica paused in the middle of brushing Maddie's hair and glanced at her daughter in the mirror. "No, sweetheart," she answered gently. "Just thinking." But the question stayed with her. The girls were perceptive. Too perceptive sometimes. Alex didn't pressure her. He didn't call or text or knock again. He waited. She knew he was still in town because she saw his car once, parked discreetly across from the bakery. Another time, she caught a glimpse of him in the corner of the bookstore, pretending to be interested in a travel guide while sneaking glances at her daughters as they picked out picture books. He was careful, respectful, always staying just far enough away not to intrude, but close enough to let her know he was still there, still hoping. By the end of the week, something shifted in her. Maybe it was the way Lily said, "We don't have a dad, right?" in the middle of coloring a picture. Maybe it was the way Maddie looked at other families in the park and asked why other kids had someone who picked them up on their shoulders. Or maybe it was Jessica herself, tired of carrying the weight of a decision that wasn't meant to be permanent. She remembered what it felt like to be young and full of wonder, and how that week with Alex had made her feel safe, alive, seen. And she wondered what it would feel like to stop running from the past and actually confront it. That Saturday, she called him. Her voice was flat, emotionless, and straight to the point. "You can come to the park tomorrow. They'll be there around 11. But no questions. No big introductions. Just, be normal. If they like you, they'll show it." He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The next morning was sunny but crisp, one of those early spring days where winter still lingered in the breeze. The girls wore light jackets and rain boots, running through the grass and shrieking with laughter as they chased each other around the playground. Jessica sat on a bench, her heart pounding in her ears. When Alex arrived, he didn't go to her first. He stood near the path, watching. Then Haley noticed him and stopped running. She stared at him for a moment, not afraid, just curious. Slowly, she walked over and said, "You're the man from the festival." Alex knelt down, not too close. "I am," he said softly. "Hi." Lily and Maddie approached, circling him with suspicious fascination. Haley tilted her head. "Why are you here again?" He smiled gently. "Because I like parks. And I wanted to say hi. Only if that's okay." They exchanged looks in that silent, wordless way children often do when something important is happening. Then, with a kind of unexpected grace, Maddie held out her hand. "Okay," she said simply. Jessica watched all of it unfold from a distance. Her throat tightened as Alex sat cross-legged on the grass while her daughters began showing him their rock collection, their drawings, their favorite games. He didn't overwhelm them. He didn't act like a savior or a father or someone who was owed something. He listened. He laughed when they made jokes. He let them lead. When the sun began to lower and Jessica finally called them back, the girls ran ahead, cheeks flushed, voices loud. Alex stood slowly and approached her, his expression unreadable. "They're incredible," he said quietly. Jessica crossed her arms, not ready to let the wall fall yet. "They are." He nodded, then looked at her with a different kind of heaviness. "Thank you for letting me see them." "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I know," he replied. "But still. Thank you." She looked away, blinking hard, and then without meeting his eyes added, "They liked you." "I liked them more than I thought possible." The silence between them lingered, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was full of something else, possibility, maybe. Jessica didn't say goodbye. She just turned and walked toward the car, the girls climbing in ahead of her. But she didn't stop him from watching them drive away. And for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel like running. The week that followed was one Jessica could only describe as surreal. The girls asked about the man in the park more than once, especially Haley, who had always been the most curious of the three. Jessica kept her answers simple, unsure of what exactly she was ready to say. "He's a friend," she told them. "Just someone we used to know." But even as the words left her mouth, she could feel the weight of the truth swelling behind them, pressing to be let out. Alex began to appear more regularly, never pushing, never demanding. Sometimes he would show up at the local library when the girls were attending their story hour. Other times, they'd spot him at the market or near the playground, always from a respectful distance unless the girls invited him over, which, increasingly, they did. He brought them little things, not expensive gifts, but thoughtful ones, coloring pencils, a jar of homemade slime, a worn-out book Jessica remembered mentioning during their first night together years ago. It was always something small, as if he was trying to show he had been paying attention, both then and now. Jessica watched him with careful eyes. There was a steadiness in him now that hadn't been there before, a humility that surprised her. He never talked about his wealth or career. In fact, he never mentioned money at all. When he spoke, it was about the girls, about her, about what had been lost. And one day, she asked him, directly and without preamble, "Why didn't you look for me harder?" They were sitting on a park bench. The girls were climbing the jungle gym, their laughter filling the background like music. Alex didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands together, the way he always did when he was nervous, then looked at her and said, "Because I didn't think I deserved to find you." Jessica frowned. "What are you talking about? You said you tried." "I did," he replied. "But not as hard as I should have. At first, yes, I hired a private investigator, searched through hospital records, everything. But when I came back to the US, I wasn't just lost, I was broken. My name didn't mean what it used to. I couldn't get into my own company. My money was tied up. I was sleeping in a guest house behind a friend's property just to have a roof over my head. And all I could think was, what would I even offer you now? What kind of man comes back from the dead with nothing in his hands and asks to be forgiven?" Jessica was silent. She didn't know what she had expected to hear, but it wasn't that. "I was ashamed," he continued. "And then time passed. Too much time. I convinced myself you'd moved on, maybe met someone else. I thought maybe it was kinder to let it be. But I never stopped hoping. I kept dreaming of that night. The way you looked at me. The way you laughed. You made me feel like I wasn't just some CEO or public figure, you made me feel like a man. She turned her head, biting her lower lip to keep it from trembling. You left me alone, Alex. Pregnant. Scared. I didn't know where you were or what happened. I thought you didn't want me. I never stopped wanting you, he said quietly. And if I could change it all, I would. But I can't. I can only ask you to let me show up now, however you'll allow me to. They sat in silence for several minutes. The late afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting golden stripes across the ground. The wind carried the faint smell of flowers and grass. Jessica thought about all the nights she had rocked the girls to sleep, crying softly so they wouldn't hear. All the days she had gone without eating just to make sure there was enough formula, enough medicine, enough comfort. And then she looked at him, really looked, not the fantasy version of Alex that had lived in her head all these years, but the man in front of her, wounded and imperfect and trying. She spoke slowly, not entirely trusting her own voice. You need to understand, this isn't just about me. It's not about whether I forgive you. It's about them. They don't need someone to visit and disappear again. They need stability. Consistency. If you want to be in their lives, it can't be halfway. I know, he said, his gaze steady. I want to be all in. I want to earn my place. She studied him for a long moment. Then take it slow. Be here. No grand gestures, no promises you can't keep. Just, be real. Be someone they can count on. I will, he said. I swear. That weekend, he offered to take the girls to the town's art fair. Jessica followed at a distance, just to see how he would handle it. She watched as he helped Maddie tie her shoelaces, lifted Haley onto his shoulders so she could see the puppet show, and patiently let Lily paint his hand with glitter even though it made him sneeze. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, only quiet joy. It wasn't perfect, he got the snack order wrong and lost a balloon in the wind, but the girls didn't care. They laughed harder that day than they had in weeks. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Jessica stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom and whispered, mostly to herself, "They like him." She felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, hope, guilt, and something warmer beneath it all. She wasn't ready to name it yet. What she did know was this: he had come back. Not as a man with grand speeches or heroic timing, but as someone flawed and uncertain, trying to rebuild what had once been broken. And for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep the door locked anymore. It was a rainy Tuesday when Jessica found the box. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular. The girls were at school, and the house was unusually quiet, which gave her a strange kind of restlessness. She decided to clean out the small storage closet in the hallway, the one where she had tucked away things she hadn't been ready to face. Old paperwork, baby clothes, broken toys, photos she hadn't framed. The box was at the very back, covered in dust and topped with a folded baby blanket. It wasn't labeled. She didn't even remember putting it there. She pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the hallway floor, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. Inside were memories she had buried long ago, ultrasound images, faded hospital forms, a tiny newborn hat. Her throat tightened as she sifted through them. Then her fingers touched something unfamiliar, tucked between 2 stacks of folded papers, an envelope. It was wrinkled, stained at the edges, and sealed but never opened. Her name was written on the front in handwriting she hadn't seen in 5 years. Jessica stared at it for a long moment before she peeled it open. The letter inside was written in ink that had smudged in places, as if it had gotten wet or had been handled too much. The paper was creased from being folded for so long. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it and began to read. It was from Alex. His words were rushed, slightly messy, written on unfamiliar stationery. He had dated it 5 years ago. The letter described the crash, the hospital, the isolation. He said he didn't know if she'd ever receive it, but he had begged a relief worker to send it to the only address he could remember, the one she had mentioned once, casually, when talking about her childhood home. He wrote that he didn't know if it was still valid, if she still lived there, or if she'd moved. But he had to try. He had to tell her she wasn't forgotten. He ended the letter with a line that struck her like a lightning bolt. If you're reading this, Jess, it means the world didn't win. I found you, or you found this. Either way, I hope it's not too late. She pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes, and for the first time since he had come back, she cried not from confusion or anger, but from the weight of the truth. He had tried. Not just now, not just recently, with his quiet patience and new humility, but back then too, when he had been broken and lost and alone in a hospital bed. He had written to her, and the letter had been lost in the shuffle of her life, buried under survival and heartbreak. That evening, when the girls were asleep, she walked out into the yard with her coat pulled tight against the wind. Alex was there, sitting on the porch swing, as he often did lately after the girls went to bed. He stood when he saw her, the usual uncertainty in his expression, as though still afraid he would be turned away. She didn't speak at first. She just held out the letter. He took it, confused, and unfolded it slowly. The moment he saw his own handwriting, he gasped and sank back down onto the swing. His fingers ran over the words as if touching something sacred. His voice caught as he said, I thought this was gone forever. I wasn't even sure it ever got sent. It didn't, Jessica said quietly, sitting beside him. It ended up in a box I never opened. Until today. He looked at her, his eyes glistening. I was scared you'd never know. That you'd think I abandoned you. I did think that, she admitted. For a long time. But now I don't know. Maybe the universe has strange timing. He laughed bitterly under his breath. 5 years is more than strange. It's cruel. She glanced at him. And yet you're here. They sat together in the darkness, listening to the wind rustle the trees and the faint hum of distant traffic. Jessica folded her hands in her lap, then spoke again, softer this time. That letter changes things, Alex. Not everything. Not overnight. But it changes something. He turned his head slowly. Does that mean there's a chance? She didn't smile. She didn't promise him anything. But she nodded. There's a chance, she said. Not because of one letter. But because you wrote it. Because you meant it. And because I never stopped hoping that one day, there would be a reason to forgive. For the first time since he had returned, Alex didn't cry or speak. He just reached out, not to grab her hand, but to let his fingers rest near hers, an invitation, not a demand. And Jessica, after a long, quiet pause, moved her hand just slightly so that her pinky brushed against his. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something real. Something earned. Spring faded into summer, and the rhythms of life slowly shifted. What had once felt like a fragile experiment, allowing Alex to step into the world Jessica had built alone, began to take on a shape that felt, strangely, like stability. He showed up. Every time. When he said he would meet them at the lake, he was there early. When the girls had their first school recital, he sat in the front row with flowers, misty-eyed, not just from pride, but from disbelief that he was witnessing a moment he had thought he'd never have. He helped with homework, packed lunches, learned how to braid hair from YouTube, and burned pancakes every Sunday until he finally got the recipe right. The girls started calling him Alex at first, cautious and playful. Then one day, without announcement, Lily called out, "Dad," across the grocery aisle, and he froze where he stood, a can of soup in one hand, stunned into stillness. When Jessica turned around, all three girls were laughing, dancing in the cart, singing nonsense songs, and it struck her, not like a thunderbolt, but something gentler, deeper, that this was no longer temporary. This was becoming home for him, too. She didn't tell him when it happened, but one night, while folding laundry, she realized she wasn't waiting for him to disappear anymore. The anxiety that had once followed his every action, that voice whispering, "Don't trust too fast," had grown quiet. He wasn't perfect, he left the bathroom mirror fogged up, he forgot garbage day twice in a row, but he was real. And he was present. One afternoon in late July, the five of them sat on a blanket under the shade of a tall oak tree behind the house. The girls had just finished a makeshift lemonade stand that earned them $7 and a handful of paperclips from a generous neighbor. Jessica was lying on her side, her head resting on Alex's leg, while he traced idle circles on her shoulder. The girls were building a tower out of sticks and leaves, and the air was thick with the smell of grass and sun and childhood. Alex cleared his throat. Not loudly, but with that particular sound she had come to recognize as nerves. "I've been thinking about something," he said. Jessica didn't open her eyes. She answered. "I know this life isn't the one we imagined. And I know I missed the start of it. But if you'll let me, I want to be part of everything that comes next." She sat up, slowly, brushing her hair out of her face. "Alex. I'm not asking for a reset," he said quickly. "I'm asking for the chance to build something new. From here. From now. With you. With them. I don't need a wedding. I don't need a ceremony. I just need you to want this, too." Jessica looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who had vanished all those years ago, but the man who came back and stayed. The man who learned the names of their stuffed animals, who carried all three girls to bed after movie night when they fell asleep on top of him, who left love notes in the form of grocery lists and inside joke doodles. The man who showed up when it mattered. "I do want this," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just never thought I'd get to have it." Alex smiled, not wide or smug, but soft and relieved. "You do," he said. "We do." 3 months later, they stood under that same oak tree, this time surrounded by paper lanterns and laughter. It wasn't a grand event, no photographers, no white gown, no speeches, just a gathering of people who mattered. Jessica wore a simple yellow dress, the same shade as the ones the girls had worn on that day in the park. The triplets wore flower crowns and ran in dizzy circles around their feet. Alex held Jessica's hand and whispered the same promise he had once made years ago, "I'll be back in a month." She laughed through tears and replied, "You're already home." And this time, he didn't go anywhere. The years ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be days of doubt, arguments over nothing, dishes left in the sink, and sleepless nights. But there would also be birthday mornings with pancakes shaped like animals, forts made of couch cushions, car rides filled with loud singing and sticky fingers. There would be forgiveness and growth and laughter that healed old wounds. And most of all, there would be love, imperfect, honest, and lasting. The kind that left no one behind. The kind that stayed,